My name is Captain Claire Hartley. I'm 35 years old, and on a Wednesday morning in April, a classified file landed on my desk that was not meant for me. I almost sent it back without opening it. Almost. The file had my name on it, my full name, my rank, my service number, but the classification level on the cover was 3 levels above my clearance. Files do not arrive at the wrong desk accidentally in this building. Everything is routed. Everything is logged. Every piece of paper that moves through this facility does so through a system designed specifically to prevent mistakes. This file had arrived at my desk with my name on it, at a classification level I was not supposed to see. I opened it. Inside was a photograph. It was me. Unmistakably me, my face, my build, standing outside a coffee shop I recognized immediately, the one on Marlowe Street, 2 blocks from my university apartment. The timestamp on the photograph was March 14, 2009. I joined the Army in September 2009. Someone had been photographing me 6 months before I enlisted. I sat at my desk for 4 minutes. Then I closed the file, I put it exactly where it had arrived, and I walked to the bathroom and stood at the sink with cold water running over my wrists the way my grandmother taught me when I needed to think clearly. I had 11 years of intelligence work behind me. I had never been more afraid of a piece of paper in my life. Let me tell you who I was in March 2009. I was 22 years old. Final semester of university, politics and international relations degree. I had applied to 3 graduate programs and was waiting to hear back. I lived in a shared apartment on Marlowe Street with 2 friends from my course. I was not remarkable. I want to be honest about that. I was a good student, organized, curious, the kind of person who read 3 newspapers before class and argued about geopolitics over cheap pasta. I had no connection to the military, no family members who had served, no contact with any official body that would have justified surveillance. I was a 22-year-old student standing outside a coffee shop on a March morning. And someone had taken my photograph, and that photograph had ended up in a classified file bearing my name at a classification level 3 above my clearance. That file had been created before I joined the Army, which meant someone had been watching me before I decided to enlist, which meant, and this is the thought I stood at that sink trying to process, someone may have known I would enlist before I knew it myself. The object at the center of everything that followed was not the file. It was the photograph. Specifically, the coffee cup in my hand in the photograph. I remembered that cup, not because I remembered that specific morning, it was 15 years ago, but because that particular coffee shop used distinctive red paper cups with a white logo. They changed their cups to blue in 2010. I remembered this because my flatmate had complained about it. Red cup, white logo. March 2009. The detail was so specific it proved the photograph was genuine. It had not been fabricated. It had not been taken from a social media post. I barely used social media in 2009, and certainly not on that street corner. Someone had physically been there with a camera in March 2009, watching me. I thought about that at the sink with the cold water running. Then I dried my hands. I walked back to my desk, I picked up the file, and I started reading everything else inside it. There were 14 pages in the file. The photograph was on page 1. Pages 2 through 6 were a biographical summary of my life from birth to September 2009. School records, university transcripts, academic assessments, a psychological profile conducted without my knowledge by a method I could not immediately identify. Page 7 was an assessment of my suitability for recruitment into a program whose name I did not recognize. The assessment was dated June 2009. 3 months before I enlisted, 3 months before I had made the decision to enlist. The assessment concluded, and I am paraphrasing because the exact language is classified, that I was an ideal candidate, that my profile matched the specific parameters the program required, that recruitment should proceed through standard channels to avoid triggering the subject's awareness of selection. The subject. I was the subject. Pages 8 through 14 were redacted, black lines through every word, every name, every detail. But at the bottom of page 14, one line had survived the redaction. 14 words. Subject has performed within expected parameters. Recommend continuation of the longitudinal study. Longitudinal study. A study conducted over a long period of time. How long had this been running? There was one person on that base I trusted completely. Her name was Sergeant Ana Reyes. She had been my operations specialist for 4 years. She had a photograph of her grandmother taped to her monitor. She kept a notebook with a red cover where she wrote down everything that mattered. I went to her desk at 10:15 a.m. I said, "Ana, I need you to do something for me, and I need it to stay between us." She looked at my face. She closed her notebook. She said, "What do you need?" I said, "I need you to find out if there is a program designation that matches this." I wrote the name from page 7 on a piece of paper and folded it. I said, "Don't search it on the base network. Personal device only. And Ana, if anyone asks you about this before I talk to you again, say nothing." She took the paper without unfolding it. She said, "How long do I have?" I said, "I need to know by end of day." She said, "Done." I went back to my desk. I sat with the file in front of me and I did not touch it. I thought about the photograph, the red cup, the white logo, March 2009. I thought about a 22-year-old student who had no idea she was being watched. I thought about 11 years of service, every assignment, every posting, every decision that had felt like my own. Had any of it been mine? I need to pause here, because what Anna found by end of day is the part that required me to make a decision I had no training for. If you have ever discovered that something in your life was not what you thought it was, drop a comment below. Tell me how you handled it. And subscribe right now, because what was on the other side of that program name is the reason this file should never have reached my desk. Anna came to my office at 5:47 p.m. She closed the door. She sat down across from me. She placed her red notebook on the desk and opened it to a page covered in her careful handwriting. She said, "I found the program designation." I said, "Tell me." She said, "It is a longitudinal talent identification and development program, started in 1987. It identifies individuals in their late teens and early 20s who demonstrate specific analytical and psychological profiles. It tracks them through education, waits for the right moment to present conditions that lead to voluntary enlistment or application to intelligence services." I said, "Voluntary?" She said, "The program never forces the subject. It creates conditions. A professor who notices your work and says something that plants a seed. A news event that occurs at a moment when you are most receptive to it. A conversation that happens to take place within your hearing." She looked at me. She said, "The program designation in your file has been active for 37 years. You are not the only subject. There are others. The file count attached to the designation runs to several hundred." I sat with that. Hundreds of people, watched, profiled, guided toward careers they believed they had chosen freely. I said, "Who runs it?" Anna looked at her notebook. She said, "The oversight chain is heavily classified, but the program was originally authorized by a committee whose members included," she hesitated, "several names that are still active in senior positions." I said, "Are any of those names in this building?"
She said, "One of them." She wrote a name on a piece of paper and slid it across the desk. I looked at it. I had worked with this person for 3 years. I had trusted this person. I closed my eyes for 2 seconds. Then I opened them. I said, "Anna, I need you to make one call for me."
Colonel Patricia Morrison, Inspector General's Office, 22 years in military law. She answered on the second ring. I said, "Colonel, I have a classified file that was delivered to my desk by mistake this morning. The classification level is 3 above my clearance. Inside is a photograph of me taken 6 months before I joined the Army, and documentation of a surveillance and recruitment program I was never informed of." Morrison was quiet for 5 seconds. Then she said, "Don't move the file from your desk. Don't discuss this with anyone in your chain of command." I said, "I have already spoken to my operations specialist. She found information that—" Morrison said, "I'll need everything she found. Send me nothing digitally. I'm sending someone to you directly. They will arrive within 2 hours." She said, "Captain Hartley, one question." I said, "Yes." She said, "Did you read the name on the oversight chain?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Is that person aware that you have seen the file?" I said, "I don't believe so. The file was delivered by mistake. As far as I can determine, no one knows it reached me." Morrison said, "Good. Keep it that way." 2 hours. She hung up. I looked at Anna. Anna looked at the red notebook. I said, "You should go home." She said, "I'm not going home." I said, "Anna." She said, "I found the name too. I'm not going home." I did not argue. We sat together in that office for 2 hours. Anna made tea on the small kettle she kept on her filing cabinet. She had kept it there for 4 years. She made tea the way she did everything, without fuss, without drama, simply and well. We did not talk much, but we did not need to. Morrison's people arrived at 7:43 p.m. 2 officers, both carrying equipment I recognized as forensic document analysis tools. They worked through the night. They confirmed the file's authenticity. They traced its routing history. They identified the point at which it had been misdirected to my desk. Not an accident, a deliberate redirect. Someone had sent the file to my desk intentionally. Someone who wanted me to see it. Someone who wanted the program exposed, but could not expose it themselves. Morrison's people found the redirect origin at 4:15 a.m., a terminal in the Records Management Office, accessed at 11:47 p.m., 3 nights before the file arrived on my desk. The credentials belonged to a records clerk named Sergeant James Holloway, 26 years old, 8 months from retirement, clean record for 19 years. Morrison interviewed him at 5 a.m. He confirmed it within 10 minutes. He said, "I've been in records for 19 years. I've seen files I was never supposed to see, things that didn't sit right. I knew I couldn't report it through normal channels because the people who would receive the report were the people it was about." He said, "I needed someone who would understand what they were looking at, someone who would know what to do." He said, "I picked you because your file was the cleanest thing in the program, because you came in top of every assessment they ran on you, because if anyone was going to handle this correctly, it was going to be the person they had spent 15 years watching because they knew how good she was." I sat with that for a long time. He had not sent me the file by accident. He had sent it to me specifically, because the program had spent 15 years documenting exactly why I was the right person to receive it. The investigation ran for 10 months. I testified 4 times. Anna testified twice. Sergeant Holloway received whistleblower protection and testified in full. The program was suspended pending full review. The senior official, whose name was on the oversight chain, retired quietly 3 weeks after Morrison's investigation began. A retirement that had not been scheduled. That happened very quickly, without announcement. 3 other officials connected to the program's oversight were investigated. 2 received formal censures. 1 faced additional charges that are still being processed. The program itself, the 37-year longitudinal talent identification program. Morrison's final report concluded that while the program had produced effective intelligence officers, and it had, hundreds of them over 3 decades, the foundational ethics of surveilling and manipulating civilians without their knowledge or consent could not be reconciled with the standards the institution was supposed to uphold. The program was formally closed. I received a letter confirming the closure. I framed it. Not with pride, with something more complicated than pride. Because the program had worked on me. I was good at my job. I had chosen this work freely, or I had believed I chose it freely. The line between those 2 things is something I am still working out. What I know is this: I am still here, still serving, still doing the work. Because whatever brought me here, I chose to stay. That choice is mine. That one I am certain of.
The photograph is still in the file. The file is in the evidence archive now. I do not have access to it. But I remember the photograph clearly. Me, Marlowe Street, March 2009, red cup with a white logo, 22 years old with no idea that someone was watching. I think about that version of me sometimes. She was curious, she was organized. She read 3 newspapers before class and argued about geopolitics over cheap pasta. She had no idea what was coming, but everything she was, all of it, was exactly what the next 15 years required. Maybe that is the strangest part. Not that they chose me, but that they were right.
Here is what a photograph taken 6 months before I joined the Army taught me. You cannot always know who is watching. You cannot always know what is being recorded. You cannot always know which decisions in your life were entirely your own and which were shaped by forces you were not aware of. What you can know is this: when the file lands on your desk, open it. When the timestamp does not match, ask why. When something feels wrong before you can explain it, trust that feeling. Investigate it. Follow the thread. And when you find the person who sent the file specifically to you because they believed you were the right person to receive it, do not let them down. Sergeant Holloway spent 19 years waiting for someone like me. I hope I was worth the wait. Drop a comment and tell me your story. I read every single one. And subscribe. I am here every week with a new story. Same ending every time. She stayed calm, she stayed quiet, then she won.